Hey out there, legal warriors. In this video, I'm going to cover some common crimes we see charged when people are out there protesting, marching. Heck, it could even happen during a parade. Anytime we've got one set of people sort of unhappy with another set of people and law enforcement in the middle, we can see lots of different charges. So if you're interested in this area of the law, stay tuned. This is the video for you. My name is Attorney Lance Fryrear. I'm a defense attorney in Linwood, Washington. My law firm's been defending people charged with crimes all throughout Washington State for more than 25 years. And I'm putting out these videos to help educate the public. So if you find this useful, please like and please subscribe. More people get to see it. More people get the help they need. Now, as always, I'm just going to jump right into it. Anyone who knows me knows that I don't really pay attention to anything really that happens in the local news. I try to not pay attention to national things unless it's big fancy trials on YouTube. And why that is because, I've got my own fleet of problems to solve that are real life. But some staff of mine recently brought to my attention that there's been a lot more protesting and things going on, at least in the Seattle area, than average. And someone on my team asked me to put out a video about what are some common crimes that we see charged during a protest. And this has nothing to do about who's on one side or who's on another. This is looking objectively at what we see charged when we have one group of people upset about something, another group of people's on the other side, and usually it's law enforcement in the middle. So I think the first and most common thing we see, the first type of crime would be some type of assault charge. In Washington State, assault is pretty much any unwanted touching, unless there's a defense of self-defense. And the assault charges, if there's no injury and no weapon involved, is typically a gross misdemeanor, assault in the fourth degree. But what we see differently in these protest situations is we see a lot of assault in the third degree. Assault in the third degree is generally a misdemeanor level action, any unwanted touching that doesn't cause significant injury, but on a special class of person. And in protest, that special class of person is a law enforcement officer who is doing their duties. If a law enforcement officer in Washington State, while they're performing their duties, are assaulted, that's any unwanted touching without an excuse, a legal excuse, then that is a felony of assault in the third degree. And you'll see quite a few arrests in those type of protest situations for assault in the third degree. If there are just a scuffle between people that aren't in a special class, right? We've got a protester and the anti-protester, and they get into it. If it's pushing and shoving, something like that, that is likely going to be assault in the fourth degree, a gross misdemeanor. And of course, if we have some type of assault situation where injury happens, we can move up to assault in the second degree. Typically, I think about that as something that has a broken bone or stitches. There's a more broad definition, but those are the ones we see most often. Or if there's a weapon used. If a weapon is used, let's hope that doesn't happen, but some type of bat or some type of baton, or let's hope there's no firearms used, then we can move from assault 2 up to even assault 1. And those are major felonies. And so obviously, best to not get involved in touching people or throwing things at people, right? Throwing rocks and throwing bottles, those can also be assaults, whether they connect or not. And again, your mileage may vary, but I've seen that type of thing come across our office. What's the next thing that we often see? Well, a common one would be obstruction, right? That is the sort of what the officer keeps in their back pocket to go hands-on and make an arrest in a protest situation. If we willfully hinder a police officer from doing their duties in a lawful way, right? If it makes it harder for them to do their duties, that's the general way to think about it, then we've got obstruction. And of course, whether or not an officer has the ability to order you here or order you there may depend on where you're at. But what we don't want to do is willfully interfere with an officer making some type of arrest on somebody. That will typically, at the very least, get us charged with obstruction. And that's pretty common. You can see you've got your friends there, or somebody's at a protest, there's stuff going on, and we don't at all agree with what the officer's doing. It's unfair. We might start to get involved to stop them from arresting our friend or arresting our loved one, or just someone who's on the same side of the dispute as us. And that will definitely open us up for a possible obstruction charged by an officer. Obstruction is not a felony. It's another gross misdemeanor. And in that type of situation, officer often uses that to try to control the situation. Another one an officer will try to use is disorderly conduct. It doesn't really fit quite as well. Think about disorderly conduct as using fighting words that creates a substantial risk of assault. So you might see an officer try to use disorderly conduct if we've got one person on one side stepping up to the other chest to chest and saying, let's fight or something. If the officer may try to use disorderly conduct to try to break that up and saying, hey, you just created a substantial risk of assault, and therefore I'm going to make an arrest to try to stop that from happening. What else do we see? Well, we also would obviously see criminal trespass if we are in areas where we're not supposed to be, areas that have been clearly defined that we're not supposed to be according to different types of private property, things like that. An officer can make an arrest for criminal trespass in the second degree if it's just on property, criminal trespass in the first degree if it's in a building. There's notice requirements and things like that, and so I'm just talking about the types of things we see charged. In those cases, we may have more defenses because it's a chaotic situation. How do we exactly know we're supposed to be? Is there a fence there or something, or do we assume we're not to go around the fence? And so there's more defenses in those cases, but also, we may end up arrested if we're not careful in that situation. Another one I can think of that we see is malicious mischief. That one is very common. Malicious mischief is a crime that is basically property damage that's done in sort of an angry and intentional spirit, right? Knowingly and maliciously damaging property of another. And we can imagine lots of situations, right? Someone's kicking the cop car and then they get a dent in the car. They throw the bottle that goes through the window of something, and we've covered this in other videos, but if we intend the action that causes the damage, we're sort of stuck with whatever damage we cause. If we intend the action, if it's at all foreseeable, we are stuck with the outcome. So that's one we see as well. Malicious mischief. I've seen arson before. Hopefully no one set anything on fire, but that's one. If you set stuff on fire, you could easily get an arson charge. And I think one that I have seen within about 2 or 3 years ago, harassment. Harassment in Washington State is making a verbal threat to another person to harm them, or to harm their property, or to harm the person or property of another, and that person reasonably believes the threat will be carried out. And so you can imagine, all the fighting going back and forth. I'm going to kick your such and such, and I'm going to do this to you. And an officer in that situation can make an arrest for harassment if they can articulate how the person receiving the threats reasonably believe the threat may be carried out. In a really hostile and intense situation, we might see that happen as well. So I've covered this pretty quickly, but you can see there's a theme, right? Most of the time, I like to think about it that the officers involved in situations will do their best to control the situation, but when it gets out of control, they have a lot of things in their pocket they can go to, and things that actually don't even really seem fair, right? Because they're using their judgment about, did the person think this threat would be carried out or not? That's a judgment call, right? And, was this an assault? Did it rise to the level of assault? If, someone's trying to interfere with my arrest, did it rise to the level of obstruction? It really comes down to what they want to do to try to control the situation. They have this broad number of charges that they could bring. And then, of course, if you get a defense attorney, we're going to defend them in all the different types of ways that it could be defended. Notice, intent, defense of others, right? And there is some right to defend someone from an unlawful arrest if that unlawful arrest is causing someone physical harm, but generally not if it's not If it's just an unlawful arrest and not causing physical harm, if they're not getting beaten with a stick at the time, then we have less of an ability to assert a defense of others in that situation. So this is not a video about, who's right or who's wrong. It's a video to what to think about if we're out there in some type of protest situation, the things that can get us arrested that don't really seem obvious. Yes, your words can get you arrested. Yes, throwing stuff that doesn't even hit people can get you arrested. Not listening to the officer's commands can get you arrested. Going places that sort of look sketchy can get you arrested. They can only arrest so many people, but hopefully you're never in the situation where you're needing to hire an attorney to deal with something that came up because you were doing what you thought was right. Do what you think is right, but do it in a way where you don't need my services. So I hope you found that useful. If so, please like and please subscribe. More people get to see it. More people get the help they need. More importantly, if you got a criminal problem in Washington State, feel free to reach out to my firm. We've been doing this for more than 25 years. If we get on board, we'll listen to what happened, we'll identify a way forward, and we will be there for you. Thank you.